Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a fascinating mosaic of recent events. We're pulling threads from global politics, legal shifts, media narratives, even some powerful cultural moments. Our mission, like always, is to give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed, finding those unexpected connections, the surprising facts, the stuff that illuminates the bigger picture.
And that interconnectedness is exactly what we're aiming for today. You'll see how things that seem totally separate, judicial nominations, missile tests, even the Super Bowl performance, they're all, in their own ways, reflecting these big trends shaping our world. We've got quite a stack of sources here, and yeah, we're excited to help you figure out what's really important.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at survey data on political divides, internal chatter from a major news org, legislative action, global military stuff, cultural things, all happening like right now in July 2025. It's a lot, definitely, but we'll make sure you get the key nuggets. So kicking things off, let's look at this survey. Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Ipsos. It's from April 2024, and it clearly shows immigration is, well, it's a growing national concern. 54% of Americans now see controlling and reducing illegal immigration as a very important foreign policy goal. That's way up from just 42% back in 2018.
But it really is striking, and how quickly that shared concern just splits into these completely opposite solutions. The survey found almost 9 out of 10 Republicans, 86% see this as important. That's an all-time high for them in this poll.
Yeah.
But for Democrats, huge contrast, only 34% say the same. And what's maybe even more telling, when you look at specific policies, there's not one single policy that a majority of both parties agrees on. Not one.
That's such a crucial point. It shows how even when people agree on the problem, the how do we fix it part reveals these really deep divides. So Republicans, for instance, they heavily favor more deportations, 89%. Expanding the border wall, that's 87%.
Yeah.
And penalties on businesses hiring folks without authorization, 85%.
Right. And then Democrats, it's almost the mirror image. They broadly favor making it easier for immigrants to legally come and stay. That's 80% for undocumented immigrants, 79% for visa holders. And pathway to citizenship, big support, 85%. But they mostly oppose more deportations, 53% against, and the wall, 69% oppose it.
Yeah, clear opposition there.
But wait, the divisions don't just stop at the party line, right? This data also showed some really key intra-party splits inside the parties themselves. This nuanced data, it doesn't just show Republican versus Democrat, it shows this. Really interesting, maybe volatile ideological tug of war within both parties, like non-Trump Republicans. They're actually more open to helping legal immigration for people fleeing violence, 63% of them compared to just 38% of Trump Republicans. And they're also more likely to support extending temporary visas.
And it's not just the Republicans. The Democratic side isn't unified either. This really jumped out at me. Moderate Democrats, they actually show surprising alignment with some Republican-favored punitive ideas, like penalties on businesses hiring without authorization, 68% support, increased deportations, 64%, even expanding the border wall, 56%. That's a world away from their liberal counterparts in the same party.
Exactly. This internal complexity. It means finding any path forward on immigration reform. It's like trying to walk this incredibly thin tightrope between all these different factions, almost impossible. And speaking of these big shifts in policy, we're seeing something just as critical happening in the judiciary. Our global legal and judicial events. 2025 Outlook source. It highlights President Trump nominating Emil Belv. That was back in May 2025 for the U.S. Court of Appeals, Second Circuit.
Right, and that nomination definitely stirred things up. Bipartisan objections started popping up in June, July. People citing Belv's, well, lack of judicial experience, his partisan ties, his role defending surveillance programs, and his support for really broad executive power. Then that Senate vote on July 17th, it really highlighted the split. Republicans pushed the nomination through, 51-49. Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast the tie-breaking vote.
Yeah, the implications there are, they're pretty profound. It signals the GOP's clear plan, really, to reshape the judiciary with loyalists, which, some argue, really undermines the old bipartisan norms for picking judges. And it raises serious questions about judicial independence, especially when you get into politically charged cases. And if you connect that dot to the bigger picture, the Supreme Court's regulatory term, the one that ran October 24 to June 25, we've seen a huge rollback of federal regulatory power.
So basically, the Supreme Court is shifting the power balance. More authority going to the states. We saw them strike down the ACA mandate for free preventive services, invalidate the ATF's power to regulate ghost guns, citing the Second Amendment, and uphold state bans on gender-affirming care for minors. Taken together,
What does this pattern of rulings tell us about the court's philosophy right now, beyond just states' rights?
Fundamentally, it points to a very deliberate and pretty rapid realignment of judicial power. It's consistently pushing major policy decisions away from federal agencies back to state legislatures, and critically, it's reinterpreting core amendments in ways that really challenge long-held precedents. Which brings up this big question about how constitutional interpretation itself is evolving. From your perspective, what's the biggest long-term impact of this kind of judicial shift?
Well, I think it just creates a massive amount of legal uncertainty, especially in areas like healthcare, gun control. States are left scrambling with this patchwork of different rules. And looking ahead, the Trump v. Casa birthright citizenship case, that's definitely one to watch. The Supreme Court agreed back in June to hear arguments this fall. It could potentially redefine the whole interpretation of the 14th Amendment. A landmark ruling in 2026 seems likely, which could destabilize immigration policies, civil rights precedent, even more. The impact of these judicial shifts is just huge, reshaping American governance from the inside. But how do these stories, these narratives of power, division, how do they filter down and get interpreted by the public? That leads us right into the media landscape. We looked at some pretty interesting discussions on Reddit about NPR, and it's clear people have strong opinions about its perceived bias. A lot of listeners were critical. They argued NPR engages in what they called sane washing, or both sizing, basically making controversial figures like Trump seem, well, giving credence and legitimacy to ideas that deserve neither, as one person put it.
Yeah, but the counter-argument you hear a lot, often from NPR defenders, is, well, if both the hardcore right-wingers and the hardcore left-wingers are mad, maybe NPR is actually doing its job, trying to be nonpartisan, objective. It's an interesting tension. Some also suggested, though, that a lot of the negative posts on Reddit might be from trolls or bots or maybe astroturfed accounts just trying to undermine support, cut into donations for NPR.
That's a really interesting angle, the motivation behind some of that online criticism. But, amidst all that debate, there's also this clear appreciation for NPR as an essential service, especially its local news, the emergency alerts, and its reach in rural areas, places where commercial radio often just doesn't go. It really highlights that service part of public media beyond just the national headlines. Makes you wonder then just how big of a hit these proposed funding cuts could actually be for folks in rural areas day to day.
Which brings us right to that very timely issue, the funding cuts threatening public media. There was a CBS News report July 18th, just the other day. It detailed how the House approved this package. Late night after midnight. Mostly party line vote, 216 to 213. Only 2 Republicans voted no. And it cuts roughly $8 billion in foreign aid, mostly U.S. aid, and about $1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's the money that supports NPR and PBS.
And former President Trump immediately praised the vote on Truth Social, said something like, Republicans have tried doing this for 40 years and failed, but no more. This is big. The vote itself was actually held up for hours because of what people called the Epstein fallout. Democrats were demanding a vote to force the Justice Department to release Epstein files within 30 days. Republicans voted that down, offered a non-binding resolution instead.
Yeah, that whole procedural fight really shows the intense political climate around this vote. President Trump also put out statements on July 18th, called the Epstein controversy a scam perpetuated by the Democrats, denied writing some bawdy birthday letter to Epstein, called it fake A.E. Sefsty. So it's clear this external political pressure is definitely a factor in how things played out legislatively.
Exactly. And the Senate had actually passed a slightly different version earlier, narrowly. It restored some global AIDS funding. Some senators also voiced concerns, specifically about cutting public media impacting rural emergency alerts. People rely on that. And the CPB president said flat out, these cuts will force many local public radio stations to just shut down, which has, huge lasting negative impacts for everyone. It's a really clear example of funding decisions hitting communities directly. Okay, let's shift gears now. Moving beyond domestic policy and media, broadening our view to the global stage. Military power, diplomacy, cultural moments. India, for instance. They've been making headlines with their defense capabilities. A WION article from July 17th detailed successful tests of 2 nuclear-capable ballistic missiles. First, the Agni, that's medium-range, 700 to 900 kilometers, carries a 1,000-kilogram payload. And second, the Prithvi SOFACT, shorter range, surface to surface, about 250 to 350 kilometer range.
Right. And these tests, they're absolutely integral to India's nuclear deterrence strategy, their credible minimum deterrence doctrine. Both missiles can reach deep into Pakistan, hitting cities like Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore, and also parts of China. And what's more, these tests happened just a day after India successfully tested its Akash Prime air defense system up in Ladakh. It took out high-speed aerial targets. This is all coming out of India's own Defense Research and Development Organization, the DRDO. It really shows their push for self-reliance and maybe even defense export potential. Definitely solidifies their role as a major regional military power.
And that focus on self-reliance, it seems to extend to their partnerships, too. The India-Singapore Maritime Bilateral Exercise, SIMBEX 2025, is happening right now. 4 Indian Navy warships are involved: INS Delhi, Satpura, Kiltan, and Shakti. It's the 32nd time they've done this exercise.
Yeah, SIMBEX is crucial. It's about strengthening maritime security, working together against threats like piracy, smuggling, terrorism, non-state actors. And it's about ensuring those sea routes in the Indo-Pacific stay free, secure, and follow international rules. It's a key piece for regional stability and projecting influence.
Okay, shifting now to global legal stuff. Brazil's Supreme Court made a really big ruling back in June 2025. Could set a global precedent. The court ruled that platforms like Telegram and X, formerly Twitter, they can be held civilly liable for content that incites violence or discrimination, even if it's posted by users, by third parties.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely puts pressure on U.S. courts to maybe rethink Section 230 protections. And it sparks this huge global debate about free speech versus public safety online. And another international legal news, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants in July for 5 senior Taliban officials. This is for crimes against Afghan women, forced marriages, denying education, what they're calling gender apartheid. Now, the Taliban rejected it, of course. So did Pakistan and China, questioning the ICC's jurisdiction. But it still reinforces the ICC's role in pursuing gender-based justice.
Okay, finally, let's look at a really powerful cultural moment, one with global resonance. Super Bowl 59, back on February 9th, 2025, Grammy winner Ledisi performed Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's widely known as the Black national anthem. Happened right before the game.
Yeah, and that song has such deep historical roots. Written by James Weldon Johnson way back in 1899. The NAACP adopted it in 1919. The NFL started including it back in 2020, remember, after George Floyd's killing. They framed it as showing a commitment to diversity, acknowledging their own messy racial past, especially after the Colin Kaepernick protests.
And yeah, as you probably guessed, it definitely sparked controversy. You had conservatives arguing there should only be one national anthem, one that includes everyone. But supporters, they see including it as vital for visibility, for pushing back against the erasure of African American history. It's a really powerful symbolic moment, underscores that idea that Black history and voices won't be erased. It's almost like everyone's looking at the same map, but they have totally different ideas about where we should be going, right?
That's a great way to put it. What's so fascinating here is seeing how all these seemingly separate things, the shifts in judicial power, public opinion on immigration, the arguments over media bias, performing that specific anthem at the Super Bowl. And then alongside that, you have these critical global defense moves, international legal rulings. It all reflects this broader, deeper reevaluation of what national identity even means. Who gets to define it? How does information get shared and consumed?
So what does this all boil down to for you listening? It's really a reminder, isn't it, that beneath every headline, there are just layers. Layers of history, internal party fights, global connections. Being truly well-informed means digging into those deeper currents, not just skimming the surface news.
Yeah, exactly. So as you move forward, here's something to think about. In a world where these divides seem to be getting deeper, both between political groups and within them, and where every information source is under the microscope, how do you personally make sure you're getting a full, nuanced picture of the issues that matter most? What really stands out to you about how all these stories we talked about connect?